science and sustainability under the auspices of UNESCO. I have written this long name so many times, so I can remember it. And we have been working very hard to establish this opening and to welcome you. And what we have been doing is to set up a workshop in the morning on sustainability and PBL. And in the afternoon there will be the formal opening. And most of you will also be invited for the formal dinner tonight, or a networking dinner, and tomorrow there will be a symposium. So we have tried to set up this opening program that it's not only a celebration, but it's also we have created events where it's possibility for networking and for learning something more about PBL and sustainability. I have taken the floor as the first one, and then you will not see so much of me. The rest of the day will be my colleagues, and it will be the formal level of the university. It will be the rector and the dean, and that will open the center. But I've taken the floor this morning to tell you a bit more about why is it that we are going for this World War Center, and what is the special approach, the special scope that we have created in this center and that we want to develop together with you. So we are already on the web. We have cheated a little bit. So the website is launched. That had created some problems with some links. We are sorry for that. But the web is up. And the UNESCO chair that has all the activities in the UNESCO chair will now become part of the World War Center. The UNESCO chair has for a long time been involved in research training. We have had a lot of PhD students, and we still have PhD students from all over the world, where we train these PhD students. And the reason for that we have really had a huge emphasis on PhD training is that when the PBL system that you will learn about today, that we have here at Aalborg University, it's not possible to transfer that to Malaysia or to India or to Poland or to Germany. We have a curriculum. It's somehow a social construction. And in this transformation process, we need to research on how actually learning and core learning principles can be interpreted and can be adjusted to that special culture that we want to change. Perhaps in Germany, perhaps in Malaysia, in India. We have also had for a long time a master education on PBL, and it's a full-time, it's a part-time program, but it's full an online education where we have had many participants from South Africa, from Chile, from Germany, from many places all over the world, actually. And we have been running for a long time consultancy and workshops and global network activities. All this will be brought into the Aalborg Center now. So what is new? Because we have this with the problem-based and project-based learning. So what is actually new now? We have also had this with engineering science that we have had a focus on for a long time. So, but what is new is that we now also focus on education for sustainable development, or education for sustainability. And that is new. And the reason that we have made this link is that you can say that the problem-based, project-based learning, it is more a form. It gives competences that are relevant for companies. But what is also out there in social or society challenge, it is a sustainability. And for a long time, actually, especially in Europe, there has been a long tradition for education for sustainable development. And what we can add here is that we can add that the complex learning, and it's a question of complex knowledge and complex competences. This is what we will add to where the problem-based, project-based learning is actually a way to learn this complex knowledge and complex competences. So this is an adding on, you can say. We are still doing a global network, we are still doing research, and we are still doing education, and we have added another area now. It's outreach, where we want to reach out to companies, but we also want to reach out to high school, to secondary school, also to recruit students more into engineering education and science education. Because I think we have to realize, and that is not only me, it's acknowledged by many organizations and many of the professional organizations, that for engineering education we have two types of challenges. We have a challenge of quality, with a challenge of if we actually educate the right people, or with the people with the right competences, and we have an issue of quantity, how to recruit and educate enough engineers for our society. We have these three areas, but the center will make partnerships for each of these areas, for engineering education, for problem-based learning, and for education for sustainable development. And sometimes these partnerships will also go across. Just to say a little bit about Aalborg University, because this is where you are, and it should be the Dean, and I'd like to welcome you this morning because it's me. But it's founded in 1974. And it's quite important to have that in mind, that this is a quite new university. We have just had a celebration, a 40 years celebration. And today we have 4 faculties. We have 18 departments, and we have around 20,000 students. And we have campuses at 3 places now. This is the situation for most Danish universities, that they have campuses all over, like in Australia, for example. There has been a great success for Aalborg University. And the success, I have not put in all the statistics, I have only put in the sentences here. So you can ask for the statistics. We have the highest retention in Denmark, or you can say the lowest dropout. If we are in the US, it's called retention. If we are in Europe, it's called dropout. 80% of our students are coming from non-academic homes. That is quite important for many new universities that are in a transformation process. Because it also means that it's actually a university that has proven that we can reach out to non-academic families. And these students, they even graduate by the highest retention rate. We have the fastest completion rate in Denmark. That means that our students, they finish on time. More or less. Maybe for a master, 5.2 years or 5.5. But it's compared to many of the other universities, this is a quite high rate. Relevant competences. By the companies, we are ranked as #1 university. And we have a very high score among the students. And even the QS ranking, I'm not very fond of this QS ranking. But you see, as soon as you start to crawl up the ranking list, then you will see people will put it on their slides for the universities. But it's more than that. So if we look at international research in this area, and this is what is really the aim of the Aalborg Center, it is to research and to provide documentation for how PBL works and why it works. We can say from international research, and we have several articles out there, students are getting more motivated, they get people learning, higher grades, increased skills and competences, and the employability is increased. So for many reasons, PBL seems to be a good idea. And you could ask the question, why is it then that not the whole world has changed in this direction? And maybe many of the universities are now on the track to put in pieces in their curriculum of this type of teaching and learning. If we look back on the establishment of Aalborg University, I have put in here a star. It was founded in 1974. And some of you will remember the period in the 60s and the 70s. And some of you have read about it in history, seen how people looked. But it was a quite radical period at that time. It was established up here with regional support. And also at that time there was an integration of 2 engineering schools here in the north part of Jutland. So already at that time there were experiences actually of how to change from a more traditional teaching and learning to a problem-based and project-based learning. And some of my colleagues in this room, they have been involved in that process. Aalborg University is part of Reform University and the period of Reform Universities. And these Reform Universities were quite important and has shown their worth. That they have, and especially these 5 universities, they have survived with an alternative pedagogical model. They can prove quite good results. And they are living examples of that new teaching and learning methodologies. This can work. And people can come and they can see. We have had for a long time many visitors to come and see, is this really working at Aalborg University? Can you really do things? Is it true with all these group rules that you are talking about? Is it true that the students are happy? Can they really formulate their own problems? Can that be allowed within academia, that students are formulating their own problems? How can you control the discipline? How can you control the learning outcomes? I hope that some of these questions can be answered today and tomorrow, because it is possible. But of course you also need some control and some of the curriculum. But these Reform Universities, they have really had a great impact on the reform of the universities afterwards. The learning principles for McMaster and Maastricht, this is medical universities. And these medical universities, they are using these type of learning outcomes. These are the learning outcomes, or the learning principles, sorry, that that were formulated for the Danish universities at that time. Looking at the learning principles, it's more or less the same. And at that time, I would say I had no idea that we had Maastricht and McMaster University, that they were established with alternative pedagogical models. That was not something that we knew about. It came to our knowledge during the late 80s. So the history of Aalborg, we started out very radical. And I have tried here to put some faces into this model. This model represents 3 types or 3 extremes, you can say, of university types. One is the traditional academia, where most universities are, with the disciplines, with the textbooks. Another one is what we want to go for right now, and what has really within engineering education been on the agenda. It's the market-oriented and the entrepreneurship. And the last one is in society oriented, that you are more critical, and sustainability. I would say, looking at the history of our university, we started out over in this corner. We started out with being radical. We wanted to change things and see outside the windows what have changed. We really wanted to have an impact on society in many ways. So among the students, this was the approach, this was the thinking at that time. Then something happened. And I would say something happened in the mid of the 80s that we realized that maybe this was not the way to go. So there was a whole rethinking of the pedagogic, of the whole curriculum, and much more in employability and much more thinking about that we actually at Aalborg University gave the students the right competences and skills. And we started to a high degree to conceptualize PBL. Then in phase 3, I would say, and we are still there, and some of my colleagues would not really agree with me, but we can discuss that afterwards. Somehow the disciplines, they dominate. And that the academia dominate more. At the same time, I would say that we figured out from 2007-8 that we should rethink maybe our whole pedagogical model if we should not lose it. So it was a whole strengthening actually of again the PBL principles. And we were thinking of ICT, megaphonics, learning space, and etc. Many different things. And a whole trend and many initiatives were taken at that time. And now, I hope somehow that we are a little bit, maybe a bit, not to be in that corner again, but to integrate elements from that corner. Aalborg University should be, or the Aalborg Center should be exemplary for what Aalborg University is doing. We can only have really a credibility if we can say at home, we have data, at home we do this and this. See, we can do this. So it should be based on a practice. And this is the integrated learning, that it's not so that we should be here, but we should actually integrate from this phase and from this phase and this phase. And sometimes we are in this corner and sometimes we are in the other corner. That we have more variation and we are more aware of where we are in the variation. I also think for our students that identity and values will be very core in the future, also for engineering students. There are so many choices that have to be made. And these choices, we cannot prepare just on a knowledge base. We also have to prepare that actually our students, they can think on their own, and they have really good critical thinking skills. Just to give you some examples of these, what has happened. This is one example. This is how we started out in the 70s. And this was this model where we had courses that were supporting directly the project and assessed with the project. And then we have some courses for their own. This was an old model. And that was changed, that was changed here some years ago to more parallel courses. And many reasons for that. And many good reasons for that. Also flexibility in the curriculum, etc. But also one reason is that you could say that you have more visible disciplines here and you are assessing the disciplines more visibly. Another attempt that we have been making, it is that our pro-rector some years ago started this initiative on rethinking the Aalborg PBL learning principles. And this brochure, and this small brochure has come out of it, and it's something that we are working on in the whole system to think what is it actually, why is it that this model is so successful? What are the learning principles here? So there is a whole vision here and curriculum, students, and many elements the whole way through. The educational vision still goes back to where we started, with the problem orientation, with the project organization, with the integration of theory practice participants, students that can actually decide on their problem and which problem they want to work on. And when they have made their own decisions, they're also maybe a bit more motivated. Okay. So somehow to sum this up, I would say that, well, we have different types of projects at Aalborg. Sometimes our projects, they are up here, sometimes they are in the middle, sometimes they're down here. And what is really important over here is that it is both a problem analysis, that students learn how to analyze problems, but also that they learn how to solve them, and also that they contribute to theory. So it's not either or, this is both and. We were established as a new university. Just a few words about change strategies. Because this, with the establishment of the new university, is somehow, you can say, a rebuilding strategy. You create a whole new system, and it's much easier. So what about you who are sitting, who are from traditional universities, where you have you have the parallel courses? How do we change that? What we see right now is that we have three types of different strategies for change in our education. It is an add-on strategy, it is an integration strategy, and it is a rebuilding strategy. And just a few words about this. The add-on strategy, this is an example from mechanical engineering. Anyone from mechanical engineering? Oh, can you recognize it? And now I want to add on. But what should I kick out? Maybe I can do it as an elective. Maybe this is a way to put in sustainability or project management, that we do it as an add-on. The problem with the add-on is that, of course, you are getting more and more stuff into the curriculum, and of course the students, they will learn at a more and more surface level, you can say. The integration strategy is quite different. It is where you say, well, we have some extra competences, and the students, we need now to integrate into the disciplines. So it's a mapping of knowledge and skills, it's defining the learning outcomes into integration, and it's also integration of company projects. So if we look at this, it's from the CDIO, and we have the different courses. We have not broken. We have not we have not broken down the boundaries between all the disciplines. But what we do, it is that we say that presentation skills could be integrated here and here, or the project management could be integrated there, or the critical thinking could be integrated, or the reporting could be integrated. And this is an alternative way of doing it. Still, you can say, well, if we really want to go for innovation, and we really want to go for something with innovation and company projects, we also need to go across the disciplines. So somehow, most of the universities that want to approach entrepreneurship and innovation also needs to have a rebuilding strategy, where we have to rebuild our courses and rebuild our curriculum, where we go for bigger courses and where we integrate both the company projects and society projects. This is a tool for doing that. It's a tool that has been developed by Roger Hackcraft. It's a capability tube where we have the disciplines up here, we have the capabilities here, and we have the process skills here. And then you can say that the complex knowledge and competences can lead to some complex situations, and it's where problem-based, project-based learning comes into place. And maybe the curriculum could look like this instead of, where we have merged some disciplines. This is the hard part. So when I started out saying, well, we know that it works, why is it that nobody actually implemented them? I would say one reason is that going cross disciplines, this is really hard. And if you have to force academics to go cross disciplines, they need to see emergency. and academics have really a hard time to see the emergency because they are within the discipline and within the boundary. Okay, I will end now. And as I said in the beginning, it shouldn't only be fun, you should also have some content in, so this is why I presented this stuff to you. But I will end with some of the activities that we have already on our desk right now for the Aalborg Center. We will, the end of the week, we will be running a seminar together with a Dublin network or Irish network on PBL. But what is really, is on the desk now, it is our next research symposium. And Nestor, where are you sitting? Here. And it will be in San Sebastian. It will be a joint conference. And it will focus on the learner in engineering education, so on the students. And it is together with three of the main organizations have teamed up here. The AIM, the Active Learning in Engineering Education, that's a global organization. The PAY, the Project Approaches in Engineering Education, and the Aalborg Center. So, saying this, thank you very much for listening. This was the first part. The next part will be now that we will have cases from Aalborg University. Okay, thank you very much. But I'm sure that all of them are hardworking because we have some great facilitators
to make them be hardworking, but also to make room for their self-directed learning. One of the facilitators I'll start inviting to the floor is actually my own facilitator. He's not that old, but he actually facilitated me when I was a student. I just want to find your presentation here.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I used to be a facilitator for Jette, and now she's facilitating for me and directing me and telling me, you are only allowed 5 slides. 5 slides? I can't do anything in 5 slides. You have to do it in 5 slides. Okay. So I have only 5 slides, and I will be telling about as it says here, my name is Henrik Risgaard. I'm the semester coordinator of one of the semester coordinators for a master program called Environmental Management and Sustainability Science. It's at the Department of Development and Planning, and I will be talking about 2 examples, 2 student groups that made projects. Because not only am I only allowed 5 slides, but also only 10 minutes. I can't do anything in 10 minutes, but I'll try anyway. The first, let's just take the conclusion first, because then at least I know I will be able to tell you what you can take away from this presentation. There are 2 cases. One is from a family-operated hotel in northern Jutland. And here, some of the things to take away is that to do this kind of project, you need to have the trust of the companies you are working with. So before actually setting up and facilitating this cooperation between students and the company, they have to trust me. Without the trust of the companies, you don't have anything. Then one of the learnings we had from this case was that the students experienced for the first time, because this was their first experience with Aalborg University and this model, that, in real life there are data gaps, where in the textbook you would be able to find all the necessary assumptions and all the data, and then you can add it into the model. But in real life, that's not the case. There's a lot of lacks of data. They didn't collect it, or someone was on maternity leave, and suddenly there is no data. So what do? Then you have to come up with your own data. And then some unforgettable data collection experiences, because this was a hotel and they were invited to stay at the hotel and had a very nice dinner and went to the beach. And so that's more fun than looking into textbooks. And then a bit negative here, I didn't focus on telling them exactly how to deliver to the company professionally. So actually they went there, they collected all the data, they were happy, they got a good grade, but the company was sitting out there, what's the feedback for me? So I had to tell them, oh no, you didn't finish yet, you have to go and deliver. The other one is a washing machine case. Students looking at washing machines, all the 327 washing machines on the Danish market. And this happened from a very small assignment in a course that they thought this was interesting, and that then developed into a semester project and some research done together with us, and that developed even further into the research done for the Nordic Council of Ministers and for EU, and now they have their jobs based on this initial experience. One of the things they learned was that the policy and what looks very nice and coherent from the distance, if you dig into it, it's actually not true that there is this coherence in policy making. There might be imperfections. And then they also learned that the external examiners that we have coming in, taking part in the exam, that they have to treat them quite professionally, because they might become their bosses in the future. So we had one from the ministry, and he later then hired these students. Could you continue your work? This is very interesting. So they got their jobs through the external examiner in the end, and thereby their jobs. So the first case was this small hotel, St. Bjerregaard, and we first met with the company, and they agreed to come on our project cafe where we present the possible projects to the students. Now the first semester in this program has a company focus, so it's the micro level, so that would fit perfect with this hotel. But unfortunately, as it is with the real life, suddenly there was an important customer, so the manager couldn't come, and he couldn't explain what he wanted on this project cafe. But we had then a backup plan, we had the slides, and we told them the story, what he would like the students to look into. And 4 students actually did it, looked into how this hotel could benefit from eco-labels. And as I said, the students were quite surprised that they didn't have all the data ready. They didn't know the consumption curves of electricity and water and so on. And they thought, is this a serious company? But that's the truth. And then the manager said, come and stay with us and make your measurements and ask us the questions and collect the data. And they found that quite fun. And then in the end, the manager said, okay, thank you very much. We will implement your suggestions. So they actually made a change, and where Annette said that was in the beginning, that we wanted to make a change in reality. Actually, our students still expect to make a difference, and these ones did. And then the no delivery, we had to correct that. And this is also an example of students getting inspiration, and they want to continue in this with this focus. So one went for an internship in Iceland and just submitted a scientific article based on the inspiration they got 2 years ago when they were doing this project. The other one is from the second semester, where we go from the micro level, the company level, to the macro level. And it's an example of students having a small assignment. It's just a 3-hour assignment, and it then exploded into something a bit more complicated. I just asked them, how good is the environmental performance of eco-labeled washing machines? Now that is quite an easy question to answer, I thought. But there are a number of washing machines on the Danish market, so you have to look into all of these 327 washing machines from 27 manufacturers. And they did that, and then they also took in a number of other policy instruments besides the eco-label, and they showed this graph, and it's not to tell you all the details, but all the blue spots are 27 different washing machines, and the lines are then the environmental performance depending on the capacity of the washing machine. So a normal washing machine can wash 6 kilos of clothes, and then you can see that the water consumption as one indicator is actually quite low, and so some of these policy instruments do not really work, and that was one of the key learnings of this. And then they developed it into a more dynamic understanding of how these different policy instruments impact the innovation of this kind of products. And they did very well, and they got their job. And so they came out with reports for the Nordic Council of Ministers, these two, and then they were hired to continue this research, and thereby they also became supervisors of new students, who they then sent out to Brussels. This one is from a student we had working from environmental NGO in Brussels. So they are impacting what will be the future washing machines, what will be the environmental performance of these washing machines in the future. So, summing up, I think one of the major things I learned from 20 years in this field is that as a teacher, you have to realize that you don't know everything from day one, because the students will take you in directions where you just have to follow and ask them questions and discuss procedures, but you do not know where this will end. It's also an indication that both these examples that PBL projects interact with the real world, and therefore they make a difference out there. And it isn't just the past, it's still happening. And PBL projects infect the students. They will get this infection in their minds, and they will remember for the rest of their lives what they did in their projects. Maybe they will not remember all they learned in the courses the same way. And then for us as a university, I mean, when we have good students, that adds to possibilities for future research. We can actually follow up and we can get funding because they impress their external supervisors, who we then can ask, okay, do you want us to do more in that direction? Well, then you have to hire these students. Okay. And finally, I think PBL projects are more fun than textbook studies. At least they are to supervisors, and I think they also are to the people going for these data collection experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrik. And now we move from the Department of Planning to Department of Electronic Systems. Jens Dalsgaard, yeah. And as Henrik said, you do not know where it will end with the students, because students are working in a self-directed learning environment. We also have self-directed facilitators. And that is why I now have to upload the slides from this young man.
From the official.
Yeah, but it's
and I was forced to say I should only come with 5 slides, so I have 14. This is the only way to compete. What do we do? Control L. Control L. Yeah. Væk med den der. Okay. Okay. So my presentation is about some of the main project I'm involved in, and I'm trying to give a viewpoint not about the technicalities and what they're doing about the project work, but more about how we see this in a learning context. This is a very old one, and I think most of you have seen this before, but I think it has gained a new attention again, because out in the society, people, they say that we don't like to study. People are not so happy about going to the technical universities and doing stuff like we're doing here. But on the other hand, I think still that people have the abilities and also the what shall we say, they want to learn. And I think that might be a twist for the future, that we should take this into consideration. Okay, what we're doing. This is the 3 main pictures from my daily work. First year students, a very weak grade spot. We are building satellites, and just to give an impression of the size of these satellites, this is a CubeSat of 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. So this is the size approximately. If we take 1/3 away, we have a satellite size. And we do this because we want to get the attention from the students. And I think most of the students think that it's very fun to work with rockets and see things up in space. And I think even a few of us that are here today can remember the first time that the man was walking on the moon. At least I can. So, this is our main goal. We don't want to have them study. We don't want to make them learn something. We want to have them have a fun daily work at the university, and by that they learn stuff. So this is the last launch from our number of satellites we did February 1 year ago, named AAUSat-3, and I think that name indicates that this is our first CubeSat, and we launched it from India together with some other satellites, and these are quite big satellites, and this is our small satellite. So on that rocket there were 3 secondary satellites, and we were the smallest of these satellites. Okay. This started around year 2000, and in the US, I have to say that not here, unfortunately. And the idea was to enable students to design, build, test, and operate the spacecraft, because if they can do that, they are very clever guys or girls. We also have those, still one girl for the time being. So, and just to make this story very short, this was not initiated by staff or university. Our building of CubeSat was initiated by the students, because they have been reading about this. We also want to build satellites. So it was students coming to start, say we want to build satellites. We started 2001, and our first satellite was launched in 2003, and this is the one on the left here. Our concept very short, 100% do it yourself, no customer on the shelf. You do not buy any stuff. They have to manufacture everything, including mechanical stuff, side panels, PCBs, mounting, soldering, writing software, doing antennas, all the stuff. This, of course, has to go through a long way of doing project work. They have to do some analysis, they have to do some design, manufacturing, test, dialogue with launch provider, and so forth. So in that way, they are coming through all the, what should I say, the bottlenecks that you have as a normal engineer out in the real world. And just to stress it out, the teachers do nothing except going for functions like this and talk about that was we teach doing. Okay, I can see later today you will have a visit nearby, seeing what some students are doing. I think this is a very good idea, because if you take this normal learning parameter, we can see that people do not learn anything from having lectures. So I imagine that you will not have anything left in your head when I leave this podium today. Okay, so I would rather have taken you to my lab, or this is not possible today, but you at least to go to another lab where there are students who doing project work, because then I think that you will see the ability of learning quite rapidly and at a high level when you are dealing with the things with your hands. So this should maybe also have been the case today, that we should have split up you in 5 teams, take you out in 5 different places and do some real project work. Okay, just do it. The Nike slogan. What we do is maybe a little bit special. It's sometimes we call it PBL Square, because what we're doing is that we have students from many semesters working together. So then spring have students from 4th, 6th, 8th and 10th semester working together on constructing, designing, building a satellite. So for instance, our last satellite, our main computer system was designed on the 4th semester. Our system that can point the satellite in the correct direction was designed by students at 8th semester, but they have to work together. So in that way, it's said that older students help the younger students, and all get responsibilities according to their level. I think it's very efficient. But no freemiums. A normal PBL, after 1 semester or 2 semesters, we normally end up with what we call a functional prototype, which is not capable to be launched up in space. Nobody will send a functional prototype up in space. We give about $100,000 for sending up a satellite like this in space, so it's a little bit expensive, not including the money we do for manufacturing satellite. So we of course see that students split down the line. Somebody will continue in the project and somebody will drop out because they think it's too hard. One of the problems is that we don't get any educational credits from going what we call the functional prototype to the flight quality satellite. If you take a look at the work distribution, I think maybe 40% of the work is within the normal educational curriculum, and maybe 60% is volunteer work in holidays, winter times, weekends, Saturdays, Wednesday evenings, and so on. So there's no free units, and only the hardworking students will be able to come through this process. Fun, but not only fun. We see research, we see spin-off. Up until now, we have 2 spin-off companies the last 10 years here, and I think there are maybe 25 employees in Green now directly spinning off from our laboratory. Very short, because time is running. What are we doing? The main idea, the first idea from this project was coming from the Danish Safety Administration. Greenland is part of Denmark. They want to observe ships sailing around Greenland. This is quite difficult because from here to here there's maybe 3,500 kilometers, and there's about 55,000 inhabitants on Greenland. So there's not many cities around the coastline, meaning that it's very difficult to have observations of traffic in an economic perspective. So the administration asked us, is it possible to do this from CubeSat? Here you have 120,000 euros. Start working now. And the students said, of course it is possible. And we did not know prior to starting this project. Of course there's some problems. Can we have optics on board a small satellite observing ships from 800 kilometers height? No. Can you have radar? No. There are many no's, but one facility did obtain a yes, and this is what the AIS means, automatic identification system. Ships are sending out beacons saying, I'm here, and we can listen to these beacons from space. So after launch last year, this was one of our first match ships that the student satellites were tracking all around the world, and this was collected in 2 hours from space. Actually, our main bottleneck is now getting data down from space because of the very slow radar propagation. Our CV, we are quite busy. We have already been building 3 CubeSats now, and we have 2 more down the queue line, ASAT 4 and ASAT 5 that we're going to deliver. ASAT 4 will be delivered for launch in 1 month from now, and ASAT 5 will be delivered before Christmas. So we are quite happy with this situation, except that we are missing students, not so many students as we want to have are going for being here. Concluding with remarks, slide number 14. It's fun. It's fun for students. It's fun for me. That's why the students are working very hard. We have gained some international cooperation. In European Space Agency, there is an educational program we are in together with Norway, Sweden, and Finland. We also have contact to other countries around the world. Last night, we got an email from Serbia that wants to participate. I want to involve us in building a CubeSat. So the students are traveling around the world, not with the teachers, but two and two together, trying to fill up and set up the skilled engineers. We are spread to high schools. Next week I'm going to Norway as a referee in a CanSat competition for high schools from Scandinavia. So things are progressing. So, bottom line, makes it fun to come to work. Okay, thank you.
The Department of Civil Engineering, where Ken Smith will come and present what your students are doing. So please take it.
Thank you. I'll try to get down to earth after these satellites. We are dealing with much heavier things than satellites. We are dealing with buildings and energy infrastructures and things like that, much heavier things. I come from the Department of Civil Engineering, and one of the divisions in civil engineering we are dealing with, we are calling it architectural engineering. We are dealing with things. Maybe I should say from the beginning that in our department we also have other divisions dealing with sustainability in form of you could say machines for energy production, for sustainable energy production. We have people dealing with windmills technology, we have people dealing with wave energy technology. So we have many research and education activities in those areas as well. Today I will talk about what we do related to buildings and sustainability. And I think, as I see it, we mainly work with these two points. How can we build sustainable buildings? That means how can we take into account people's welfare, safety, and so on, and indoor environment. In the same time, be aware of energy use, CO2 footprint, any kind of cost you can say for the building. So that's one aspect that we're looking at, and another aspect. The first one is related to buildings, how do buildings perform in use and operation. And the other aspect is, you would say, build the buildings in a sustainable way. So how can we use technology to reduce waste of time, materials, and so on during the construction process of the buildings? First, you would say, when we want to design buildings that act in a sustainable way, we have very much focus on indoor environment and energy, and you would say we have some overall aims when we look at designing buildings in this way. And of course, when we talk about this, we have to be aware what do we mean if we're talking about zero energy buildings, zero emission, and so on. We need to be very much aware of what do we mean when we say it. Is it that the building on the local site should be neutral regarding energy use or CO2 emission? Is it over time, over the building's lifetime? Is it during 1 year? Is it the building seen as part of a larger intelligent grid in the country or in the continent or so? The students must learn about these aspects. Where do we set the limits for when we can call this sustainable, or the aspects of sustainability? So, and the way we are, or where we are dealing with this is how can we solve these problems related to buildings. So you can say the first step is to reduce the energy demand of the building in operation and use. So that's how can we do this with active technologies, passive technologies, and so on. And next step would be application of renewable energy, also related to other parts of what we're doing at the department. And the last thing we also are aware of is you always have some kind of energy conversion during the process coming from power production to the use in buildings. So can we have efficient energy conversion systems? That's also an important part. So within this area, I brought one example, or maybe I should mention two examples. We have some students right now on our 8th semester dealing with these things. How can we design buildings to operate in a sustainable way? And here I have mentioned a project where students are looking at buildings in Tibet. So this is an area where the economic resources are not very high. We have buildings in a relatively cold climate, and we have no electricity, no good energy sources to heat the buildings. So these students are focusing very much on how to use passive technologies. I don't know if it's easy to see, but this is a picture I took from the students' room last week about we would say the main problem they're dealing with. They have to focus on how can we obtain a relatively good indoor environment and the health of the people in the buildings. And in the cold climate, their goal is to obtain at least 12 degrees Celsius in the room. So that's not the requirements we would set in the building in Denmark, but that's their goal. How can we obtain this? And at the same time have a good air change rate. That means have a good air quality in the buildings, and do this without any kind of external energy sources. So they can only use the sun. So they're dealing with calculating how can we make this with this kind of this is called storm wall, where we have a massive heavy part of the wall and we have some glazing in front, and it's only heated by the sun and it creates circulation in the room. So that's how can you use passive technologies to obtain good health, good environment with a low energy use. I can say at the same time we have some students in the same semester working with a more high technology building, which is actually going to be built. If you look outside here, there's a lot of work going on in the field right here, and we're going to build a new building for our department where we have much higher requirements and we have much higher possibilities to use technology. So they're focusing more on how can we also use active technologies in controlling the environment and still have in a sustainable way to reduce energy consumption in the buildings. Yes, so this was about how do we deal with, you could say, the building, design the building to operate in a good way for many years use. The other part we are focusing on is about how do we build the buildings in a sustainable, design and build the buildings in a sustainable way. And in that part we are focusing very much on how can we use information technology to make more efficient processes. These decades, you could say, these years or decades, we are in a kind of paradigm shift in the way we are handling information in the construction industry, in the design process. For decades, we could say, all buildings are 3D. We never work in 2D buildings. So the product we are going to make is in 3D. But for decades, we have been communicating everything about this building in 2D. So we have made drawings, plans, and sections and so on to communicate. You could say the 3D intent the architect has in his head has to be communicated through 2D drawings to users, contractors, and everybody else in the construction industry. So these years, this is changing. Now we put the 3D models in the computers, and then they can produce any kind of plans and sections. And that's a completely different way of working, and that gives us some new possibilities, both in the planning of the construction, controlling construction, but also in making the right building for the user. So we have new possibilities to integrate end users of the building in the design of the buildings. And that means, you can say, that will go a longer time before we have to rebuild the building because it was built in the wrong way, we get new needs and so on. And the student example I would like to tell about here is a group that worked last fall with this technology. They have take the 3D models that architects are now typically making into a virtual reality environment. We have these Oculus Rift 3D glasses that users can get on and have a virtual tour in the building. In the same time, they have created a touch screen solution where all the people going to use this is final end users of the building. So they have a design possibility. They can move around things on the touch screen in the same time as the person here is experiencing the room to be built in 3D. So they can have a communication about the design intent and how they're going to operate in this building. In the same time, that's one part of the tale. In the very early design phases, how can we plan buildings to build the right buildings? And another aspect is how can we use the same models to control the construction process to reduce errors. This picture is from a construction site where they realized that some of the concrete elements were overlapping. So there was a huge discussion about the drawings and how should it really look. And it appeared that there were actually some collisions that were not foreseen in the design process. So there's a lot of waste of time and materials having this kind of errors in the construction process. So that's also an aspect our students are dealing very much with. And yes, and finally, I think I'll say all this, what I have mentioned here, both in the planning part and also the design of buildings, everything is closely connected to our research. So we have, the students are always working with something they feel related to research when they work in our laboratories. They work in the same setups as our researchers, maybe they're even doing parts of the research. And they also typically work with real construction projects, real life projects. This over here is from hospital buildings. We're building a lot of new hospitals in Denmark in these years, and they are using huge amounts of resources for the planning and user involvement to build these hospitals in the right way. So our students are working directly with these people who are right now designing these hospitals. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. And then, I need some noise in here, right? So let's just take 2 minutes and discuss with the person beside you what could be interesting to ask these 3 facilitators about when we start off the panel in 2-3 minutes. Please, talk.
Ask you about something. Sorry. You are from? I'm Italian. No, we are from Poland. Do you have to be only